They've been putting this together for, I think, 8 years. This is the first time doing space talks, and they reached out to me and asked if I could come give a talk, and had some cool, nerdy space friends that could also give some really cool talks. And I've got some very cool friends here with me that are going to follow this, and you've got a couple hours to drink beer. Cheers. Any drugs you brought on your own? I don't know what the policy is here, but enjoy. All these talks will be better. I'm just gonna, so basically, the idea behind this was to highlight local aerospace companies and sort of the burgeoning aerospace community that's picking up in Long Beach, and I think more broadly, Southern California. But what I sort of wanted to do here is, and what we sort of collectively decided, the three of us that are going to be talking today, is we thought it would be cool to just sort of tell you our weird personal journeys and how they led from us doing what we love into space, which, as it turns out, is one of the things we all love. And so I'm just going to tell you my story, and you can take what you will. It's called Rovers, Rockets, and Rock and Roll, but we're going to take it front to back. So, part one, rock and roll. Yes, it's in parts, but I'm going to keep this quick, I promise. So, my day job, my lifelong ambition is as a musician. And in fact, I'm going to be playing tomorrow night as part of the music festival as well, which is part of my deal with this guy, so thank you. Yeah, I play in a two-piece, fully instrumental band. It's sort of like musical juggling chainsaws. That's my regular gig. We were playing at Summerfest in Milwaukee about a month and a half ago. And any musicians in here, this is my rig. I am a complete Luddite. I don't use any digital anything in my rigs, which is sort of funny that you end up doing, another job that's highly technical, but this is what I'm dealing with every night. If any of you guys want to come, the free shows tomorrow night, we're going to be at the Compound, right? Which is that anywhere near here?
Yes.
Yes, it's near here, 6 o'clock. But I think it starts from noon. It's going to be all free shows. Please come by if you guys can make it. I think you'll like it. When I'm not playing my own music, I tour sometimes with other groups. This is, I don't know if there's any kids in here, but sorry for the fingers. This is, that's Jerry Cantrell from the band Alice in Chains. This was a solo tour he did 2 years ago. I was playing keyboards with him. That was fun. And then currently, actually, I'm working, so this is from my studio. I have a recording studio downtown LA. Again, analog. I actually record all my stuff on tape. Swear to God, yeah, it's a pain in the balls. That's Dizzy Reed he's the keyboard player from Guns N' Roses. We just finished producing a solo record for him, and currently we are putting together a band to be touring on that. So, just had our first rehearsal this week. So that's what I've been up to. And lest ye all think I'm merely an unwashed scumbag rock and roll musician, I am also an unwashed orchestral composer, and had the distinct and very awesome pleasure of having one of my pieces performed at Carnegie Hall a few months ago. Yeah, that was really, really, really cool. And last but not least, I've stumbled into a career in aerospace, and I'm going to tell you sort of very quickly how the heck that happened. But basically, in 2017, I landed a gig as a independent consultant for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory as an advisory sort of console on a microphone to fly to Mars. And did it work? Did it not work? We will discuss. So, how does an unwashed musician go to Mars? So, so basically, how it got started is I've just always loved space. I've loved space and music and a few other things, but really, as far as like anything I ever considered as a career, it's been space and music. When I was a kid, before I remember going to see, I saw Jupiter through a telescope once when I was a kid. It was about the size of a marble, and you could see the clouds and everything, and it blew my mind. I used to live in Michigan, northern Michigan, where the skies were incredible, still are. I remember going to, we went to see this thing through a telescope, and I thought, well, if I was ever going to work in space, I guess I could be an astronomer, Back then, though, there was no digital, everything was done analog. You were in the room with the telescope, and I thought, man, it just seems like a really lonely existence, and I really like my friends, and I don't want to spend all my time in a big empty telescope by myself. So I talked myself out of a space career at like the age of 7 or something like that. I'm serious, it was pretty funny. So, ended up doing music all my life. That was my degree in college, and I've been, hacking it out in a couple studios. Got fired from a couple studios in LA when I moved here, and have been, hacking away and eventually trying to get a career going as a musician. But the space thing was always something that was missing in my heart. And so about, I don't know, maybe like 8 or 10 years ago, I just got this weird bug, like something was missing and I had to find it, And so one of the things, kind of to the point of this whole talk, is this is a really incredible area in the universe, in the country, in the state, which is Southern California. If you are interested in space stuff, it's everywhere around here. And so I live pretty close to the Griffith Park Observatory, and I headed up there one time. They had an open house. There was this guy from JPL was there demonstrating the Curiosity rover, which is the one at the time that was roving, and similar to Perseverance, which also went up. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to make this guy be friends with me. Which is ironically what I did to the same 2 presenters that you're going to see tonight. I just decided I'm going to make them be my friend because I like what they do and I want to be involved. And so, weirdly enough, it worked. And we started having regular lunches together and talking about, I'd tell him about what life was like on Earth. As a musician, he'd tell me what life was like on Mars and all the bizarre things he dealt with. He's a rover planner, so he drives the rover. He's one of the few people that program the rover drive sequences. And so he really had this cool vision of how the whole company works, because it all interfaces through his job. And so one day we're having beers at Lucky Baldwin's in Pasadena, in Old Town, and we're talking, this is February 2016, and we are talking about this. We're talking about how cool it was, how Curiosity landed with this sky crane sequence where it would hover 60 feet above the ground, and then they would lower down the rover on a crane, and this thing would fly and crash. And every rendering you ever saw was like this. It was this kind of angle. You're seeing it from a removed perspective. And I told my friend, I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if we could see it like this? And I'd been on a hot air balloon trip not too long before that, and I remember the way they'd throw the sandbags off of the hot air balloon. I thought, well, maybe you could put a camera in there, you could throw that thing off there. And I'm like, what do you think? He's like, yeah, you're crazy, shut up, And I said, well, do you think we could propose that? You think that's something they might go for? And he's like, dude, no, this thing's 5 years away. They already have everything spec'd out for the next rover. There's no way. I'm like, all right. And then I started thinking, well, what about audio? Audio is a component of video. Could we just maybe record some sound, record the landing, record something? Has that ever been done before? And he says, I don't know. I'm like, well, you work there, don't you know these things? Like, I don't know. I'm like, okay. So I went home, started scouring the internet, and like, has anybody ever recorded sound on Mars? And you should be able to. There is an atmosphere. It's not a thick one, but it's there. It's very, very thin, but you should be okay, right? Now, I know nothing about this stuff, at this point in time. So, like, internet. Turns out, this brilliant idea that I thought I had, somebody else did have that idea. And that was Carl Sagan, and that was about 25 years before that. So this was not an original thought of mine, but so I started studying his history with this concept. And so basically, Carl Sagan was, is there anybody here who doesn't know who this is? Okay, Carl Sagan was perhaps the greatest, I would say without a doubt, the greatest science communicator that we ever had. He had a show on PBS when a lot of us were kids called Cosmos. He had this really cool, he would talk about billions and billions of stars. He had this really deep, sonorous voice. And he was, oh man, I don't want to say anything bad about anybody else. He was just the best, because we're live streaming. And just inspired an entire generation of folks like myself, and I'm sure, you know. And he died in 1996 at the age of 62 from cancer, which sucked. But the year he died, he wrote a letter to NASA, and this is part of that letter, and he was talking about, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could record sound on Mars? And he said, even if only a few minutes of Martian sounds are recorded from this first experiment, the public interest will be high and the opportunity for scientific exploration real. So he was very interested in outreach. He was a big fan of SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence program. And he recorded, and I think this was like just a few months before he died, he recorded this voice message to the future explorers of Mars.
I'm Carl Sagan. This is a place where I often work in Ithaca, New York, near Cornell University. Maybe you can hear in the background a 200-foot waterfall, which is probably, I would guess, a rarity on Mars. I don't know why you're on Mars. Maybe we're on Mars because we recognize that if there are human communities on many worlds, the chances of us being rendered extinct by some catastrophe on one world is much less. Maybe we're on Mars because of the magnificent science that can be done there. The gates of the wonder world are opening in our time. Or maybe we're on Mars because we have to be, because there is a deep nomadic impulse built into us by the evolutionary process. We come, after all, from hunter-gatherers, and for 99.9% of our tenure on Earth, we've been wanderers, and the next place to wander to is Mars. But whatever the reason you're on Mars is, I'm glad you're there, and I wish I was with you.
It's pretty amazing, right? That was like 25 years ago, something like that, or almost 30 years ago. And one of the main reasons we are now trying to go to Mars is one of the reasons he exactly laid out, to try and expand our species in case of, mass extinction or something like that. This guy, he was the best. So he died that year, but a couple years later, an organization that he helped found called the Planetary Society did a huge crowdfunding campaign and raised money, I think about $50,000 to build that first microphone in the top left there. And that flew on the 1999 Mars Polar Lander mission. There's a lot of names that people in the aerospace community have come up with for instruments that crash violently into other surfaces. RUD is Rapid Unscheduled Delivery. That's the one I kind of like. So that's what Polar Lander experienced. It did land on Mars, but I mean, it hit Mars very, very hard. So no data was recovered from that. In 2008, the Phoenix lander also carried a microphone, which there was some problems, I think, in general with that mission. Again, I hope I'm not getting in trouble with anyone. But the microphone was determined that there was an electronic issue that if they turned it on might potentially, I think, cause like a hard reset of the main computer or something like that, which when you're, a couple 100,000 miles away is not really something you want happening. So that was never activated. So we fast forward. Curiosity, all the other rovers, everything else that went, nobody just really ever brought the subject up again until Perseverance. And so now we're back at the bar. Remember I was telling you I was having that conversation, and I left and I did all this research. And about 6 months later, my buddy comes home from work at JPL one day, and he sends me a message. He's like, hey, I just came out of a meeting. They're going to put microphones on Perseverance. And I said, what? Okay. And I freaked out. So I'm like, that's my job. I want that job. How do I get that job, right? And so, Yeah, so basically what they decided is that there were going to be two microphones on the Perseverance rover. The first one is attached to this instrument. It's called SuperCam. It's at the top of the, we call it the mast, right? And it's a little electric microphone. It's kind of similar to what you have in your cell phone, that type of thing. And the second one is part of what they call EDL cam, which is the entry, descent, and landing camera system that recorded the descent of the rover. And they wanted to include a microphone with that Apple system. And that's mounted on the side there. And so this is where, part two, rovers, this is where my journey begins with NASA. And basically, after that conversation with my buddy, I'd done a bunch of research. And I basically, I put together a couple white papers, and I started cold calling anybody at NASA I could find with their information online. NASA, at the time, the JPL foolishly still had a publicly accessible registry where you could get emails and, in some cases, phone numbers. And so I just started calling everyone. One guy even left his cell phone number on the work number, and I was like, screw it, I called that. Eventually, it was an email, actually, that did it, and I sent these white papers out to one individual who just, I don't know, must have had a good breakfast that day, and he liked what he saw, and he emailed me right back, and he's like, you know what? We could actually use somebody on the audio side to help with this, so yeah, we'll call you in a month. And I'm going to skim over the details of this story, but I'll just tell you it was one of the most nerve-wracking and exciting moments of my life. And I had a month to then figure out how to do all the things I promised them I knew how to do, none of which I actually knew how to do. So one good lesson from this is you don't have to know how to do things, but you need to know how to find people that can do it, which I did. I was very lucky, and I found some great folks to work with. This was an early design we did. This got basically rejected just because it was going to cost too much. So what we ended up doing is flying a commercial off-the-shelf component. And that's a picture of it. It's about the size of your thumb, and then that little preamp goes inside the rover. This was a cool shot, testing, very basic testing in a vacuum chamber, and then this shows you where it's bolted onto the rover. That's sort of blown up. So it's kind of like, you know, where your driver's side door handle would be, roughly, because this is, yeah, sort of car-sized. And that's it. So we went to Mars. It landed, and it did not record the sound of the landing, which, again, a very long story, and also one of the most nerve-wracking couple of days of my life. But it turned out it wasn't the fault of the microphone itself. And our mission leader for this, his name is Dave Carule. He was the assembly, test, and launch operations leader for Perseverance. Had the presence of mind to try activating the microphone a few days later. There was a big press conference that was going to be coming out that Monday. It lands on Thursday, made a new recording on Saturday, and then Monday, this is what the world got to hear. That's it. It doesn't sound like much, but that is wind on Mars, and that is the first sounds we ever heard from the other planet. Pretty cool. So we started capturing lots of sounds, and I was off the project at this point, so I actually had to wait to hear most of this stuff, just like you guys when they would decide to release it. But sometimes there'd be a friend in there who would like send me something and be like, all right, don't tell anybody I sent you this. This was a recording. I want to see, have a listen to this, and then if anybody can guess what you think this is, who doesn't work at JPL, yell it out. Any ideas? What was that? Like a wind kind of thing? Did you say crashing into a rock? Is that what somebody said? That's actually, yes. I mean, that's not wrong. It's the rover, it's the sound of the rover driving. on the surface, yeah. The wheels, if you go to the Mars yard, if you take a free tour of JPL, which you can all do, they have it over there that they can, if you get a day when it's moving around, you'll actually hear a similar squeaking to that. Okay, this is one that's really cool. So the rover takes selfies. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen these in the papers. They are made up of tiny little images. They're all taken. That same friend of you guys that I told you I met at the bar, or at the open house, he's the one who programmed this specific sequence. And it's like, well, I think it's like 30, 40 images stitched together. So while this was being, while this photo was being taken, the rover arm had to keep moving around, and somebody there had the presence of mind to turn the microphone on during that sequence. And this is what it sounds like. I swear to you, I'm not making this up, I'm not trolling you. This is actually a sound recorded on Mars. It's just weird. Right? So it's, I guess it's some, sequence of the motor. I mean, what kind of motors would those be?
So the drill has a series, I work at JPL. The drill has a series of actuators in it. That sound is probably what we call the spindle actuator. The spindle actuator is what actually rotates the drill bit to drill into the surface. Before we take any samples, before we do any drilling operations, we warm up the system. We warm up the system by doing increasing speeds of that spindle actuator. So those sounds are probably the spindle actuator going faster and faster and faster and rotating the drill bit.
So that would be, they would do something similar for the arm as well then, I guess, likely, or?
You don't have to warm up the arm actuator, so the initial sounds are probably the system deploying, the arm actuator. So if you play it again, it's the system deploying.
There you go. I like it when you're at my talks. All right, I'm going to skip, one quick one. This is, you're going to hear the sound of a coring sample. This is actually what Jeff works on, or did for a long time. Are you still working on the drill?
No.
Okay, well, he did. And this is the sound of the drilling into the surface and taking a core sample, which is one of the main functions of Perseverance. You're going to hear the real-time audio, and you're going to see a time-lapse video taken. It's not full frame rate video, so it's basically video taken over the course of about 40 minutes. But what you're seeing is actually what you're hearing. And let's see, do I have to hit play on this, or will it play? There we go. This is what we call a spectrogram. So this is a graphic representation of sound. That's the drill starting. Those little clicks are brake releases. And then you'll hear a low rumble, which is represented by the lower frequencies. That's wind, when you hear the rumbling. And then above is a time lapse of the drilling tape. You'll see the shadow moving over time, and you can see the dirt piling up as the sample's being drilled out. It's just grinding away. It starts getting a little windier here. So I think that's pretty cool. If any of you guys want to screenshot this, I have all these sounds posted on my website. It's on my music site, but I just put it up there and it's easy. You can just go to jasonachilles.com. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the webpage, I've got a couple of blue links, and you will see Listen to the Sounds of Mars, and it's all free. You can download it if you want to use it to put it in a song or something. There's some weird stuff on there. All right, so we're going to jump ahead because I was going to talk about the future of sound on Mars and why should we care, but just we should. It's awesome. We can actually accurately make future astronomers or explorers on Mars we can outfit, microphones in their headsets and characterize the sound such that it will sound like you're walking on the surface of the planet, which is when you can't touch anything with your hands and you can't smell the air and you can't feel the unfiltered sunlight. Sound is like the one experience on Mars that people will be able to appreciate pretty much as it would exist, which is pretty cool. So yeah, basically, this guy wouldn't be able to crack that beer. Well, he'd be able to hear it crack open, but he wouldn't be able to drink it too. He's like, or she, or it, whatever it is. So, very at the end, I promised you rockets. So basically, going back to doing what we love, I've always loved rockets. I think they're cool. And as a result of doing this cool work with cool people, I was eventually given a pathway to access things I wouldn't be able to before, like launch pads. And, we're gonna skip all this stuff. Sorry, Honeybee just got skipped. Yeah. So we, actually, you know what? Yeah. Okay, remember that camera, throwing the camera sandbag off the rocket idea? So I ended up filing a grant for that a few years later, and we got money from NASA to fly this thing, do a test flight with Honeybee Robotics, which is where Bobby, our other speaker, works at. And so I ended up working with this company, and we went out to Mojave, and we did, this is engineering stuff. Again, find people that can do the stuff you can't, right? I don't know how to use CAD, but they did. And that's a picture of a 360 GoPro mounted inside of a protective cage housing that we would eject from a rocket, and that's the rocket behind us. This thing flew about 80 feet into the air, hovered, and then we ejected these cameras, and here's that video.
All right, here we go. Astronauts to all 6 second count, engine start. 6, 5, 4.
Oh, sorry. Did I?
All right, here we go.
All right.
Astronauts to all 6 second count, engine start.
So when you see this view, that's the camera. That's the actual footage. That might have been a little louder than it needed to be, sorry. But the idea of this is that you can imagine if we were to do this on the moon or on Mars, that's what you would see, without the blue sky, obviously. So this was 3 years ago, we got funded for this, and actually just this last month, we received a new grant. So Exocam is, so still working on it. This is just something nobody's ever seen before, and I hope that, we're probably going to try and do it on the moon first, because that's where all the funding is going to right now, and with the Artemis program and everything. This is just more fun stuff. So, okay, finally, I'm just going to go over a few minutes, but I'll keep it tight. So after recording that launch, I'm like, wow, this is cool. I want to record more launches. I ended up meeting another friend at NASA named Justin Foley, who has worked on a bunch of missions over there as well, and a really cool guy. And he had some friends at Vandenberg, now Space Force Base. And so we're like, you know what, let's go record a rocket. And so he did the video capture of this flight that I'm going to show you, and one of the perks of doing cool music space stuff is I ended up meeting folks that worked at Skywalker Sound and getting a tour up there and made friends with this one guy. Again, make friends with the guy. Make them be friends with you. And he was really interested in recording rockets as well and had actually mixed some audio before and recorded shuttle launches when he was younger. And so I said, hey, why don't let's all get together. So we had, this is our group. So Justin's on the right, that's me next to him. And then Benny Burt is the one holding what looks like a dead cat. That's what we call it. It's a windsock for a big microphone. We set a bunch of those up. And to his left is his father, Ben Burt. And the reason I love this photo is because at the last minute, Benny said, hey, is it cool if I make this a father-son trip? You know, bring my dad down. And I said, absolutely. And the reason I was so excited about this is Ben Burt is the sound designer for Star Wars. So that's Darth Vader, C-3PO, lightsabers, blasters, everything. That's all his dad. Yeah, Benny is the 9th Ben Burt in their family. Everybody's named Benny. It's kind of funny. So anyway, we recorded the launch, and I'm just going to show it to you because it's cool. And just for context, this one's loud on purpose, by the way. That enclosure was actually extended in height to accommodate this rocket. It was built for the space shuttle, so this is bigger than the space shuttle. This rocket has just been retired, and it also sets itself on fire right as it launches. But that's like 200 feet tall or something, I think. 250 something. When these things launch, they set the hillside on fire. And so they run that alarm until the fire's put out. That's normal. The other thing too is, at the very beginning of this video, there was a lot of birds chirping, and if you listen back, there's no birds at the end. Sorry, birds. We like to think they migrated rapidly. These videos, not this one actually yet, but that video is also at the bottom of my website next to Sounds of Mars, and check it out, share it with anybody you like. This is the last thing I'm going to share with you, and then we're going to have a quick music break while we get our next speaker up. But this was the most recent recording I made. This was actually done with a GoPro. And when these things launch, you have to be like a minimum of 5 miles away. But this camera is about 30 feet away from this rocket. This one's smaller, it's about 100 feet-ish tall. Firefly is the company, it's a newer company. Some of these newer companies are a little easier to get access to. So they were like, yeah, go ahead, put it on the gantry. You might melt your camera, but don't blame us. I'm like, okay, cool. And then we set up a lot of microphones in different positions. Probably had half a dozen mics in somewhere a quarter mile away. So the audio is really exceptional with this thing. You're also going to notice, we spoke to the engineers before we recorded this, and they said, this thing makes a certain T-Rex sound when it launches. I'm like, T-Rex? He's like, yeah, T-Rex. You're going to hear the T-Rex, and they're like, make sure you can bring out the sound of the T-Rex. So with this, I'll leave you at, fun space stuff. So here we go. So there you go. That's my journey so far. That's my time. Everyone stick around. We've got really great talks coming up. Get yourself some beers. We have some stickers and fun stuff for y'all. And cue the music, and we'll be right back. Very welcome, guys. Oh, I'm sorry. Also, if you guys have any questions about anything, come find any of us afterwards. We're happy to answer anything, especially if there's any kids here. Just come grab us. That's all. Back to the music, sorry.
No, I guess you want to give people a chance to.
Yeah, we got
Get ahead and come back.
DJ Scott, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody got a beer that needs one? That was not. Do you guys have beers or not? Are you guys good? Everyone cool here? I got mine. All right, so Jeff is, he has a little blurb here, but before this, I'm going to tell you how he and I met. I was giving one of these talks at the Long Beach Comic-Con, and that's how Jeff and I met. Just both out there wanting to talk to people and get interested in stuff. And we ended up working at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory one day where we got together and tried to figure out how to make Perseverance play Happy Birthday using the sound of the spindle motor on the drill. And so we set it up, we recorded it, it actually worked. So just so you all know, that thing does have the capability to actually play and record music on Mars. We just need to convince some people. So this is my friend Jeff, and here's his introduction. Video games grew up alongside the space program in the 1950s. Technology developed for the earliest rockets and spacecraft enabled these early video games and game consoles and still do today. This discussion will be led by my friend Jeff Megivern, a certified NASA rocket scientist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who has developed rocket engines, spacecraft, and has long been a gamer. Give it up for Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, so Jason talked a little bit about his path to where he is today, and I thinking about it one perspective of my path has been through video games. So I'll talk a little bit about myself, but I'm actually going to talk quite a bit about the cross-section of video games and space exploration, where some of the technology crosses over, where some of the themes cross over, and about a couple of the missions that we have coming up and going on now. So the picture on the title page here On the right side, of course, is Space Invaders, audience right. And on the left side is a nebula called the Pac-Man Nebula. It was first discovered, this idea of discovery, several hundred years ago, but the picture here is from the space telescope called Spitzer. So it doesn't quite look like Pac-Man in this wavelength, but in the visual wavelength. It kind of has the same, so you can see Pac-Man. The gases disappear in the visual wavelength, and if you need a little help, see there's Pac-Man. So and you see if it moves on. Okay. So some credentials. That's me about 20 years ago. I was an intern at NASA Kennedy Space Center. I worked for the Expendable Launch Vehicles Launch Operations Team. This picture is up at Vandenberg. I believe that's where the Delta IV. Yeah, so it's a Delta II behind me, which is the predecessor to the Delta IV. It's the Delta IV in the middle, so it was cool to see Jason's video of one of the last Delta IVs. This picture in the middle is the very first Delta IV heavy launch. And you can see the insulation layer on the outside is a cork, or relative of cork, and it does catch fire. One of the reasons it catches fire is because it's a liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen first stage engine. We do what's called a fuel lead so that the oxygen doesn't catch everything on fire, but the hydrogen gets a little bit on fire. So we figure we'll take a little bit of fire rather than a lot of bit of fire. My first introduction to working on Mars projects was this picture here. This is a Delta II Heavy configuration launching the Mars, Spirit, and Opportunity. That's Opportunity there. I moved out to California to work at a company called Rocketdyne up in the valley, developing rocket engines. The image up there is at Stennis Space Center, where we do a lot of engine development work. I think that's the Space Shuttle main engine. Let's see. Currently, I work at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory up in Pasadena. So, like Jason mentioned, Mars 2020, the Perseverance rover is roving around on Mars now, collecting samples. So these are the core science objectives of the Mars program. So we're studying the surface, trying to understand what Mars is made of. We're looking for signs of past life, that's the astrobiology. Where the main operational objectives are sample caching. So the videos and audio that Jason showed is that part of that sample caching objective. And we have some experiments on the rover that are geared specifically towards preparation for humans, specifically the MOXIE instrument, which is turning the Martian atmosphere into oxygen. So there's the Mars 2020 dream, a little bit before COVID. So there's about 600 of us that were supporting the team at the largest. I'm right there. So games. Some spacious games I've enjoyed. I figured I'd put a list up here. So Space Invaders, of course, is on the top page. Asteroids, if anyone's played Simpsons, Bart versus Space Mutants. And then X-Wing versus TIE Fighter. So this is one of the earliest games that really adopted joystick tech. I'll talk a little bit about that because joystick technology, the force feedback in that came from the space program. And of course, Star Fox on SNES and 64. Star Wars Rebellion, I always think about this as being a space politics kind of game. Really, Kerbal Space Program could be used to get 80% of the way to an aerospace engineering degree. My first foray into Kerbal, I didn't give the spacecraft enough fuel to return to the surface. So thank you, Valentina Kerman, for your sacrifice. Although every time I went back to her in orbit, she was happy as could be. Kerbals don't need much to survive. And of course, Among Us, but Among Us is really just space murder. So in 1958, NACA became NASA, and the first video games
that were made for pleasure and weren't accounting or some other analysis game was developed along with microchips. So that first game was Tennis for Two, developed on an oscilloscope. This is a picture of that game. So this is the net in the middle and the ball that goes back and forth. That was developed by a Manhattan Project physicist and a technician that he was working with up at what's now the NASA Space Radiation Lab in Brookhaven National Labs. So this is the setup. They had this set up for an open house at those labs. The physicists figured that no one would be all that interested in it. But in fact, when the public came, that's pretty much anyone did. They came and played this tennis for two game at the Brookhaven National Labs. And if you want to build it yourself, here's the schematic. Not too bad, some relays, some resistors. You can figure it out. So I wanted to frame the rest of the talk around an upcoming mission we have called Europa Clipper. So Europa Clipper is headed to Europa, which is one of the moons of Jupiter. The first several feet of the surface of Jupiter are a salty ice. We believe underneath that ice there is liquid water. And so the Clipper mission is going to be orbiting Jupiter, but doing several flybys of Europa to collect higher fidelity data about that moon. And look for dragons, because if you look at any old-timey map, there's dragons in the water. Space. The sun. There's Earth's orbit. There's Venus's orbit, the next planet in, Mars and Jupiter. So I had this up to talk a little bit about the trip that Europa Clipper is going to take to get to Europa. So we were originally planning to do a Venus flyby, so there's this idea of gravity assist. You fly around a planet, use that planet's gravity to give you a boost in speed or velocity. But we're not going to go towards Venus because Venus is, because it's closer to the sun, a lot hotter and a lot higher radiation environment. So we're not going to Venus, but we are going to go to Mars. So we're doing a Mars gravity assist. We're coming back to Earth and doing an Earth gravity assist, and then we're going to go out to Jupiter. So there we go. It's not to scale. So Earth. That's the International Space Station. That's been in orbit around the Earth for more than 20 years. And that's a picture from the cupola module on the International Space Station. So the astronauts that do EVAs, extravehicular activities, or spacewalks, they use a lot of VR, augmented reality, and simulated environments to do that work. So they'll float around under a large pool of water and practice the operations that they'll ultimately do during their skywalk. And even when they're in orbit, they will practice using VR to plan and really understand the procedures and operations that they're going to go through. Flying isn't just about controlling the machine, it's about understanding and controlling yourself. So this idea of understanding how the machine is working, we get through force feedback. So it's the idea that you move the joystick and it gives you feedback for representing where the mechanism is moving. So in the early days of the space shuttle program, we developed what's called the Thrustmaster joystick. This was related to controlling some of the engines on the space shuttle, so that's why it's called the Thrustmaster. The technology developed for the Thrustmaster joystick for the space shuttle program was directly implemented into the joysticks of the same name, the Thrustmaster joysticks, that you can use to fly in X-Wing versus TIE Fighter. All right, so we go from Earth out to Mars to get that Martian gravity assist. We've been flying by Mars for a number of years. So in 1962, we flew Mariner 2. It was the first spacecraft to successfully visit another planet. It was Venus in this case. In total, there were 10 Mariner spacecrafts to visit Venus, Mars, Mercury, all for the first time. And all this happened in the depths of the Cold War, and the Mariner programs led the path for human explorations. Now, leading the path for war was a video game called Space War. Also in 1962, the same computers that were used to model the Mariner missions were used in developing this Space War video game. And it was a dogfighting game. It was one of the earliest games that had some sense of simulated gravity in a space environment. So you had two spheres. This was the gravity. You flew around and ran into each other, and you kept scoring, because you keep scoring more. So through the years, humanity's been going to Mars, and we're been going to war too, but this is space talk. So in the 1960s, it was those Mariner missions. In the 1970s, we landed on and orbited Mars for the first time with the Viking missions. And as Jason talked about, the most recent has been the Mars 2020 Perseverance rover mission. All of these are part of a larger landscape of bringing humanity to Mars. So the Artemis mission is part of sending astronauts to the moon, establishing what's called a lunar gateway, and then eventually sending astronauts to Mars. So I wanted to show some comparisons of images from Viking and Perseverance. So after we land on another planet, we always take images of our feet. So in this case, you see the landing pad of Viking on the left and Perseverance's wheel on the right. After we take a picture of our feet, we take a picture from the sky deck or the top deck to get a view of the panorama of the landscape. So on the left there's Viking, and on the right is Perseverance, and that's the Ingenuity helicopter in the background there. And here's another one from the top deck of the spacecraft, Viking on the top, of course, and Perseverance on the bottom. So we're collecting those samples on Mars. We're using different software commands to control what the robot's doing, because it takes some time, takes 7 minutes for signals to get to and from Mars. We send a command and we have to wait 14 minutes in total to understand if the command actually worked. So what we'll do is we'll program a number of sequences, and we'll send all those sequences at once and let the rover go about its day. So this is the very first sample that we collected on Mars. So that's the sample inside the drill bit. The picture on the bottom left is the sample inside the sample tube, and the picture on the bottom right is the seal that we seal the top of the tube with, because these samples are part of the Mars sample return mission. The rock there in the bottom left are the 2 holes that we drilled into the rock to collect the samples. Early in the landed mission, we were drilling twice with the plan to drop one of those on the surface early and carry the other sample to the final drop-off point. And we always thought on the team that this kind of looked like Pikachu. Yeah. Jason talked a little bit about HD video. Some of the compression algorithms and the approach to translating the data that we collect in a video into something that can be usable and sendable over long distances to the space program were developed, where major advances were made for the Cassini mission to Saturn. And so the picture on the top right there is from OSIRIS-REx, which touched down and collected a sample on the Bennu asteroid and brought that sample back. And here's video of that sample collection. So we impacted the surface, collected the sample while we impacted the surface, and then bounced off. So after we fly by Mars, go back to Earth, then we end up out at Jupiter. It'll take about 7 years to get out there. We launch Europa Clipper in October, so 7 years from October we will be at Europa. Some of that chip technology was developed for Cassini, like I mentioned. The comic image on the bottom left is from the final days of the Cassini mission. It ultimately and purposefully crash landed into Saturn after lasting about 10 years longer than we planned. The temperature changes that happen in chips are important to understand because space is so cold and planets further away from the sun get colder and colder and colder. So we developed different kinds of temperature feedback to understand what temperature those chips are at. So Mars sample return. The Perseverance rover is collecting samples on Mars right now. We have the sample return spacecraft in development. It's a monster project between us and the European Space Agency to launch a very complex mission. Multiple spacecraft are involved. And like I mentioned, Europa Clipper, all of the mission planning is complete. Everything's installed in the spacecraft. The spacecraft is actually at Florida, ready for launch from Cape Canaveral, and launch is scheduled in October. The poet laureate, Ada Limon, wrote a poem that was etched on a tantalum plate and installed on the Europa Clipper spacecraft. This is an excerpt from that poem. And those are the picture on the left are the pillars of creation. That picture is from the James Webb Space Telescope, which has been providing detailed images of celestial bodies that we've never seen before. So we too are made of wonders of great and ordinary loves, of small invisible worlds, of a need to call out through the dark. And the Space Corps corrupted portal sphere said, space, space, want to go to space? Yes, please, space, 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 go to space. And that's what I have. Sure.
How hard is it to land on an asteroid and get a sample?
Very. The trick is the spacecraft is moving, the asteroid is moving. We launched from a long distance away, so you have some amount of adjustments on the way there. You have to land at a very specific force. And so the trick is mostly in planning. Now, the good thing about asteroids is the asteroids are in a defined orbit, so they're relatively predictable about where they're going to be. So most of it is in orbital mechanics, and then of course the mechanisms to actually grab a sample when you crash into it. Yeah.
What did they find in the sample?
Don't know yet, yeah. They haven't, I think they're looking at it now, but they haven't released the data. Yeah. There's something about space and space exploration. We don't know a lot. We don't know what Europa is actually made of. We don't know how the planets actually formed. And so much about space exploration is getting little pieces of data to try to inform humanity's understanding about where we came from, about where the planets came from, about why is that in space? Answering those kinds of questions. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Does dark matter have anything to do with the planning of the flights, or is that still not very dark energy, dark matter?
Yeah, most of space is that. So there isn't much dark energy is not taken into consideration when planning orbital mechanics in a macro level, but there's some amount of impact incidentally. So some of it drives changes in trajectories, how do energies travel through space. So there's a lot not understood about dark matter and dark energy, other than most of space is it.
I guess it's just going to come up when it comes up.
It'll come, we'll cross that bridge when we get there, yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Does NASA hold back any information to clients, and why would it?
One of the tenets of NASA that was part of the Space Act that created the agency. One of the core requirements is to provide what we learn in space to the public. So ultimately, no, nothing's held back from the public if it's data that it's a NASA mission. There might be delays to make sure that certain sets of data are collected in a way that are understood, and interpretation of that data might be delayed, but all of the data from NASA missions are uploaded directly to databases that are publicly available. Yeah. Anybody? Yeah.
How are you addressing the next generation of
Yeah, so outreach activities like this, at JPL, we have an education office. This is what you mean, right? Like the next generation of kids and how to inspire kids and bring them in? Or do you mean something else?
just in general?
Yeah, so outreach activities, we have an education office at JPL that partners with high schools and universities to establish internships. We look for opportunities to propose different R&D activities with different universities and academia. Several JPLers are also professors and faculty at universities, so directly engaging with students and inspiring those students as best we can. We do a lot of outreach directly with elementary and middle and high schools, just activities, our JPL open house that we have every year. Like Jason said, you can go to JPL's public relations website and book a tour. So just being available to people and trying to get out in the public and talk about space, because space is cool. Anything else? Yeah, we'll take some more questions at the end. Thanks, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Megivern with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. That was awesome. I've actually never heard him give his talk before. That was really great. And yeah, just to sort of back up the point that you were asking, like my aerospace career was a result of outreach that JPL did, and that's how I found my way into this. But all three of us, you know, nobody's getting paid to be here today. We are doing this because we were asked to, because we want to reach the public, especially, I think, the young, like really the young ones. You know, I can't see, I think there's some kids here, but like, yeah, you guys come say hi afterwards. Like, and I think, Jeff, if you can stick around as well,
Yeah.
I think the three of us will just all be up here after Bobby's talk. Come on up and ask questions and take stickers and whatever you want. So we're going to take 2 seconds, we're going to reset, and then you're going to have Bobby up here next. Once again to Jeff. Awesome. Okay, anybody need anything? You guys good?
Great.
Yeah, all right. Listen, we're all friends here. Let's just, might as well have a good time. So, okay. Bobby also has a little blurb. Before I read his blurb, I'm going to tell you how I met Bobby. So, there's a company in Altadena called Honeybee Robotics, and you guys saw that rocket launch thing that I showed you guys, the first one, where we put the camera that kicked off the rocket. The engineering company that built that I partnered with, was Honeybee Robotics. And so one day, I was wandering around the lab, and as I would do, I would go in there, drink all their coffee, and harass everybody that was trying to actually make a living. It was really fun, actually. And one time, I walked by this whiteboard, is that what we call it, right? A whiteboard? And there's a big Van Halen insignia drawn on the whiteboard, and I'm like, but there's nobody at the desk. I'm like, all right, I need to know who's at this desk. So I think I waited till you were close to the coffee room, actually, if I remember it. So I basically waited until somebody showed up at that desk, and I went over. I'm like, what's up? Bob was like, what's up? I'm like, Van Halen. I was like, yeah. Did I have the shirt on that day too?
Oh, which one? The Van Halen shirt?
Yeah, I might have.
I don't think so.
I don't know. So we became buddies, and then we started doing guitar challenges with each other. He's a very good guitarist. I can do some things, but I can't do that kind of stuff very well, even though it's my favorite stuff in the world. And we started challenging each other on like, hey, try and record this Joe Satriani song and stuff like that. So that's how we became friends. And when I was working on my project, he was working literally at the lab table next to me on one of many incredible projects this guy has designed, created, and innovated, including lunar payloads, Martian stuff, which, anyway, I'm going to let him fill you in. So, Bobby Van Ness, I used to live on Van Ness, that was the street over there. Bobby Van Ness is a guitar-playing, car-racing, robot-building space nerd. He wrote this. Oh, you misspelled humility. No, he has worked on a number of space technology development projects and will be sharing his experience guiding a new idea, like brand new stuff, from the whiteboard next to the Van Halen insignia to a sketch to hopefully to the moon in the near future. Not all good ideas go straight to space, but new technologies often find uses well beyond what they were originally intended for. Ladies and gentlemen, from Honeybee Robotics in Altadena, Bobby Van Ness.
All right. Cool. First of all, thank you for that introduction, Jason. That was great. Jason likes to kind of break the mold. Usually you put the best last. Flip it around here. This is good. Mine's going to be short and sweet compared to these guys. Awesome presentations before. But what I'm going to talk to you about is how we bring a technology from first conception on the whiteboard next to the Van Halen logo to the moon, or in my case, a few steps short. I had a really great presentation lined up for you guys, and then yesterday my company's IP and legal department told me I couldn't get it, so this is not here. But it's all right, everything we've got, I got pictures off of the internet, we're going to go through it, it's going to be just as good as it was, so hang in there. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about where I come from, my experience. I am from Albany, New York. The first space-related thing that I worked at was at Moog Space and Defense. This is when I was a student in Buffalo, New York here. Then Pratt & Whitney Aircraft Engines here in Connecticut. And then I went west to the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab over here, right up in Pasadena. And then I work at another one, you already heard it from him, but a fourth mystery company owned by a guy whose last name rhymes with pesos. So I'll let you try to guess. All right, so I'm going to start the rest of the content here with a question. And I want you to think about it. How do you drill a hole on the moon? And there's a lot of different answers, and the mystery company, aforementioned, has spent almost 3 decades figuring out answers to this question. And there's a lot of different ways to attack it, but the most traditional way, and this is the one that Apollo used, was a really long drill bit, just like this. So These are pictures of the actual hardware. I'm not sure if that was from the moon. It might be from the Houston Space Center or one of the museums. But this is what the hardware was. It was this long drill. They would drill down deep and get a sample core with that, bring up all the stuff, put it into a tube, bring it back to Earth, do science on it there. And then you also have this workable hole for other types of things, science and so forth. On the right, we've got a prototype for what would eventually become the Viper rover, which is a little bit of a back burner situation right now. It's a rover that's built and ready to go to the moon. And it should hit a little bit of a hiccup on its way there, but hopefully we'll get it there next year. So. But yeah, this is, you get there, and if you think about it, this is a kind of a lucky problem to be able to be even thinking about. The rest of a mission like this, we're talking about the payload, we're talking about the science, the reason you go there, right? We do space not just to go to space, but to figure certain things out. I mean, space is awesome, and hell, I would go to space if you could just go to space, but usually there's a mission, there's a thing we're trying to do. Figure out the density or composition of the moon rocks, or on Mars, trying to figure out, was there life? This is this one big overarching question. And in a case like this, this represents really only, it's funny because it's the whole mission's built around this, but it's almost a small fraction of an otherwise huge program where many millions of dollars are going into the launch vehicles, the transfers, all the engineering and the work that goes into the stuff preceding the science, right? And that's what it takes to get to that point. So to actually be thinking about the payloads, I consider myself very fortunate to be able to do that kind of tech development, the thing that's all the way up there at the top, under all this awesome mission architecture stuff. And I'm not downplaying that. This is some of the coolest stuff in the world. Those rockets that Jason was showing before, I mean, come on, that stuff's awesome. But yeah, so we're gonna talk about the specific thing we're trying to do when we get there, which in this case is the surface of the moon. And the moon is treacherous. It's right there, you can look up at it in the sky, but anything that you bring in, it wants to destroy. It's like if you give a birthday present to your little nephew and he just chucks it in the pool, right? Like that, the moon is just, it wants to break whatever you bring in. Whether that's drills, robot arms, spacesuits, computers, so the first thing that it wants to do, so you have this unshielded radiation environment, which it's just bombarding you with these charged particles, which that'll fry your electronics if they're not radiation hardened and protected. It'll also give you cancer if you're out there as yourself, right? And regardless of the fact that there's no air, gotta breathe. So, in addition to that, the moon goes around this 28-day cycle, 28 Earth days for one moon day. That means 14 days, Earth days, during the day, 14 Earth days during the night. So as you're sitting there on the surface, you're just getting bombarded with all this solar energy in the same way that you are on Earth, but there's no atmosphere to shield it or to balance it out. So you get up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, and then turn around, and if you think when the sun sets here in Long Beach, if it cools down, right? Well, imagine you don't have the atmosphere, and it just keeps cooling down for 2 weeks. It just got colder and colder and colder. And that's what happens on the moon, and it gets down to nearly negative 250 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're talking about a 500-degree swing from hot to cold. And something happens to materials when you do that. A lot of different things when you get into that cold range happen to materials. But the biggest one is they expand and they contract, right? So as it goes through that temperature swing, you have all of these things, your parts, all your fine little mechanisms and clearance fits and all that are physically changing shape at different rates, and that causes huge stresses on everything. Chemistry-wise, it'll just destroy the cells in your batteries, right? It'll crack your circuit boards, and it's so damaging to the point where a lot of missions, they don't even bother to survive the lunar night. It's just so difficult to make it do that, it costs so much that the spacecraft just sits there on the surface as it cools down, just gets swallowed by the night, and doesn't wake up. We feel that too in space, we feel attachment to these things. And so, all right, well, so after that, though, my question would be, do you still want to go to space and drill this hole? I mean, maybe, I know I would probably be having second thoughts right now. And the good news for anybody that still wants to explore space but doesn't want to go there is that we spend a lot of robotic missions out to these distant planets and different bodies out in deep space, right? These are the commercial lunar payload services, moon landers, which are being developed by American companies right now. There's a few private companies in Japan. China's got a moon program. There's a number of, India's got a successful moon program right now. It's a really great time to be looking at the moon with all these different providers that are successfully landing. And so, since we're not sending people, right, that previous solution of the drill, it's a different paradigm we're talking about. We've got something like this box over on the top right, which is something like a 1 foot cube, thereabouts. And that's all we've got to do the entire mission. And along with that, we've got some mass and power requirements as well. So mass, power, volume, right? Well, if we go back and we look at the old technologies for drilling, right? They're very useful in a lot of cases. In fact, that's going to be flying on the Viper rover. It's going to fly on another lander called Prime 1. But in a case like this, say we have a box, that solution isn't going to fit in the box. And so, in this case, and this is big outside the box, actually, it's a big inside the box in this case. So we have to shrink it down somehow, right? Well, this is where we find ourselves needing a new technology. And so this is the start, this is the problem, right? Okay, we need a drill that can go this far, but it only has this far to start from. Now we need to start coming up with new ways to do it. And this is where a new idea is born, right? Well, so when I started out at the mystery company owned by Mr. Pesos a few years ago, that he definitely didn't say already, that's fine. I had basically this exact problem, right? I had to drill a hole, bury a seismometer 6 feet below the surface of the moon, and had to fit inside of this box. And we didn't know how the hell we were going to do it. We had an idea. And I'm going to take you back to where that idea was. And we're going to go to Google here, because, I can show you guys Google stuff, right? That's fine. And we're going to quickly, just type in a couple of random keywords and go to the first click on here. And oh, look at that. Wow, awesome. Great, we've got technology. So the idea what we are exploring here is wrapping a band around an axis to form a tube so that we can get an infinitely long deployment out of a small box. And so it's kind of, there's some instances of this technology out in the world right now, but nothing quite like this. Nothing does exactly what we need it to do, and definitely nothing small enough to send to space, and it has the right requirements for that kind of a thing. So we were starting from scratch here. Whiteboard sketches on that I mentioned, of ideas of how where all the bearings go, what feeds in, what moves, what's fixed, and then just a series of requirements. Developing what is it that this thing really needs to do, and getting that nailed down. That's actually the first step on any tech development things. What are we actually trying to do here? Then we get into the brainstorming and the prototyping, and this is just like 5 of the 20 or more that we built prototypes, and these were making them super cheap, 3D printed parts. Not shown here. These are laser cut plastic parts, and we made each of these in like less than a day. Just cranked out a new geometry in CAD, built it in real life, and tried to see how it fit together. Most of them didn't work. That's the thing. Is like you're gonna try 20 times, and like the first 19 aren't gonna work. But that 20th one, we finally got it. Had an understanding and nailed down the actual geometry of this thing. We built some tools to be able to scale it up. And what you see here on the left, again off of that wonderful paper, whoever wrote that paper, just like hats off. Very, very useful. So the one on the left is the first space forward build. This is basically you're trying to get, with a new technology, there's these tech readiness levels as NASA defines them. And verbal idea, just like, hey, what if we could do this? That's like tech readiness level 1. You sketch up maybe a couple of dimensions, that's like tech readiness level 2. 3 is like, all right, I've printed out a little handheld thing and it kind of works and explains the concept. 4 is like, all right, we've got an actual functioning prototype and it's around the same size and shape. 5 would be like, you tested it in a sort of similar environment. 6 is like, you've got it. Like, TRL 6 is, you've tested it in the relevant environment that it would experience in space. and it's successfully done all the things that you expect it to do. Anything beyond 6 is actually flown, like it's actually got heritage. And so any tech development effort for space is really like the goal is to get it along to TRL 6. And once you're there, you can propose it for missions, you can actually fly it. That's what the goal of this one on the left was. And we'll get to the stuff on the right a little bit more. And I had pictures of myself with each of these things to prove that I was actually involved. Now, I don't have those pictures in this one, but I have a good substitute. There we go, yep. And if you're wondering where this came from, taken about, what, an hour ago? It was great. Yes, so this is what that thing actually did, and the way we tested it. We have these, the mystery company has these vacuum chambers that basically pull all the air out, and then we can test it in a simulated environment. Sometimes, if it's necessary, we'll put heaters in there and get the whole thing as hot as the lunar surface or as cold, depending on the type of environment that the system's actually going to see. So here is the thing doing the thing, which is drilling that 6-foot hole and dropping off the instrument that I'm pointing at there. See? Yeah. Now, this was kind of how it looks on that box, right? Like, this is where it goes, and you know, after seeing all this stuff, all this development, right? And this was a couple of years ago now, right? You might be wondering where on the surface of the moon it is right now, and that's the thing about space projects, is that you work for a long time on a technology, and you push it forward, and I mean, it takes a lot of energy and problem solving and just grinding on this stuff for a long, long time. And we do it because we really want to see this thing advance technology and go to space someday. In this case, that was the end of the road. So we finished up that test campaign. The customer was very excited about the results, right? And we had a NASA group, they were very stoked about this new technology. It's like, great, there. That's it, right? That's the end of it. That's kind of how it goes sometimes. It's a weird feeling working on it for sort of that long, and then it's just sort of done. Well, a couple weeks later, we got a contract, a company got a contract for building something that was even bigger. We had this technology that could deploy a tube, right? Well, what one of our business people realized was you could take that tube deployment mechanism, flip it upside down, and now you've got a mass deployment that can also fit inside of a small box. All of the tools that we had developed, all scaled up, and really nicely for this program. Actually, it was super easy, and we went through the process of re-engineering it to, instead of going down 6 feet, go up 50 feet, and that's a pretty big change. You know, this is on a bench top over here, and on the right is in front of a building. It's unbelievable how much larger we're talking about. We're like, you know, it's 5 times higher and just probably 100 times more heavy. But just like a different use for the same technology, you know, one that we didn't think of originally when we were building it. And this is a pretty cool lesson for me, where it's like, yeah, the project's ending in one way, but we didn't even know about what it was going to uncover for the next sequence here, the next development effort. So going on with this for the next few years, really, I'm just thinking back to it. This is like 3 years now that's been my life. We've developed it from like little handheld demonstrator up to a version of it that, oh, there I am again. I'm actually in this picture. I don't know why I did that. Like, that's me right there. So. Yeah, up until a version that we took to Houston in June of this year and tested at the NASA Johnson Space Center. And this is all on YouTube, public access stuff. So this is a system that we brought and deployed in one of the most amazing facilities that NASA has, called Chamber A at the NASA Johnson Space Center. This was built for Apollo. They tested the lunar surface stuff on there, the lander, the spacesuits, the lunar module, like all their different operations. They actually simulated, and it was the command module that was tested in this one, but the same facility right next to it is where they did the surface ops in a vacuum chamber with people in the 60s before they went to the moon. This is how they proved out all their stuff. So really, really cool to be in the control rooms for that. I have another great picture that you would have gotten to see of me with the headset on in the testing room and just like pointing with the great candid pose that was definitely not candid. But this is what I can show you, and this is just about as cool. This is that very same system at the bottom, which is that mast, and it just pops out of the canister there. Raises a 600-pound payload, 50 feet over the surface of the moon. And this represents TRL-6. This is the final stage of testing for this thing. We spent a long, long time building this. This is a larger team. This is the next level up of that technology. And like, once again, we crushed it, right? Once again, nailed basically everything that we could with this. This technology's been just cruising. The NASA contracting department, the game change department, that gave us this contract is extremely excited about it. But once again, that's the end of the road. So that was that. I kind of got the animations wrong here, but that's fine. Until the next big one, which, and this was, you know, I'm playing up the order of operations here a little bit. This was late last year that this contract was awarded, and this is still in the early phases, but it's the next road to, you know, leveling up and maybe getting to the moon. Another one that was funded by DARPA that gives us basically the opportunity to explore building this even bigger version of it. So the one on the left there is the big scaled up one that was done in front of the building in the parking lot, and then this one's just, you know, unbelievably large. And, you know, this might be the end of it here too, but that remains to be seen. I think we've got a path forward. It's never a linear progression from just good idea to like, oh great, let's get this right on the moon. And I think Jason, he definitely knows that. He talked about his experience with this sort of, you know, lateral motions and different projects and things that are related, and then eventually you get one that finally goes. And, that's sort of the grind that space travel, like getting things into space is. So if you're wondering now, you know, how do you get to drill a hole in the moon? Or how do you get your kids into a line or a path that will get them to do that? And this is one that I added in actually just for the presentation because I really wanted to talk about this stuff. And so I was glad to hear the question before for Jeff about, you know, what do we do for the next generation of people interested in space? And for me, it's all about the educational path, the robotics competitions, and the stuff that I used to do. This is me actually 11 years ago as a high schooler, winning a competition with a robot that I built with a team. And this is 11 years later, I'm mentoring a team up in the San Fernando Valley area. And I've seen so many people come through this program and then go on to do engineering and other things. I actually had an old student of mine that was working at JPL the same time I was there, and it was kind of a pretty crazy thing. I mean, we both come from this small town, but this upstate New York area that doesn't send a whole lot of people out into aerospace. And I've just seen like the real tangible effect that competitive robotics can have for people that are getting into engineering and trying to find what interests them, right? It did so much for me, and I just like to give the shout out. And I mean, look at this thing too. I mean, this robot we built this year, that was entirely designed by high school students. It's crazy stuff. I mean, this didn't happen 20 years ago like this. So if you're trying to figure out how to get your kids into a line like that, or even yourself like this, mentoring this program is so much fun. You just go on Google, type First Robotics, where to mentor, and you know, you can get involved with the team and just start helping out. The competitions are an absolute blast, and it does so much for the students and preserving basically just good engineers and technical people for the future. That I can't, you know, speak highly enough of the program. So that's all that I've got. And I guess I'll take a couple of questions if there's anything now, but then we'll have all three of us back up and can answer whatever you guys have got. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Can you explain what the actual field was? Which for the
Yeah.
Never
Jason,
mind.
Jason has a question. You wanna?
Well, so the drill went down, and then you recreated you repurposed that idea to now go up. What was the actual payload that would carry? What is the point of creating some to go up? Because you saw some pictures and you mentioned lamps, and there's some mention of solar something, but maybe you could explain that to the class.
All right. That's a good question too. It's something I glossed over. As we're trying to go deeper into space, Jeff had it in his. We're talking about this lunar gateway, right? We're trying to develop the moon to be a resource center. Basically a path to go deeper into space, but we're also trying to establish permanent presence on the moon. And one of the things we need in order to have a longer sustained presence on the moon is power, among a bunch of other resources and utilities and things. But what that program is trying to do is establish a way to reliably get large amounts of power onto the surface of the moon for habitats, for water refinement, turning it into hydrogen and oxygen for fuel. There's actually ice deposits on the moon, especially at the South Pole near Shackleton Crater. There are these regions that are permanently shadowed, as in they've never seen sunlight for billions of years. So there's water there that hasn't actually heated up and sublimated just off into space and gotten blown away by charged particles from the sun. So there's actually very valuable resources there that we can use to go deeper into space. It's easier to launch from the moon to get to deep space than it is from Earth. What we're trying to do is build this system, this is what we built, to go up 50 feet. And the reason for that is that if you think about you may have heard how in like Alaska, a lot of times the sun doesn't set, it just does circles in the sky. Well, the poles of the moon are similar in that there's locations where it's like 92 or 95% of all time is sun is hitting it, right? There's these high illumination regions. And the higher up the surface you get, the more percentage of sunlight you actually get. And it's all coming in directly over the horizon. So what we do to capture that sunlight is go up and then drop a vertical solar panel to get all of those direct incident rays. You get a lot more power out of that, a lot more projected area to actually collect that sunlight. And so this is basically where we found the opportunity to use that same technology in a way that we could go up with a heavy payload, very heavy solar panel. It's huge. I mean, it's probably the width of this entire feeder and about halfway back. I mean, it is a huge solar panel. Go up with it and drop it down. Cool.
Any questions?
Yeah, any others? It's tough to see hands in here. I got one from Scott.
I have a weird question.
Yeah.
So, I'm hoping the answer is what I think it is, but has anyone ever brought up a solution to drilling on the moon by just blowing it up? Like, blow up
Has
the
anybody ever thought of drilling on the moon by blowing it up?
Instead of saying, like, hey, I'm going to drill 6 feet down, someone just say, hey, I'm just going to throw a stick of dynamite on there and blow it up. To get 6 feet down.
So for 6 feet, okay, now there is actually, was it deep impact? Or like, there are impactors that are designed to just smash down. And a lot of times that's so that they can create a well-characterized like, seismic wave, and they can measure the propagation of that and get internal sort of info from that. There are other samplers, I believe, that crash into like comets or asteroids to try to like sift through them since they're so low density. The moon is actually, like, one thing I forgot to mention too is the moon's dust, like just the regolith, right, is at the microscopic level, this is one of the most damaging things as well about the moon. The reason it wants to break everything is that it's like jagged, broken glass at the microscopic level. And so if you think about like trying to push a shovel through like a bunch of rocks, right, it grinds up in blocks. And so it does make drilling or like scooping pretty difficult. We do have certain technologies that they don't blow up the surface with dynamite, but they actually puff a jet of gas. We actually have a payload flying next year called. It's a drill that basically like puffs a little bit of stream of gas down, and then it inserts this tube that gets something like 8 or 9 feet down into the surface of the moon. So there's a lot of different ways to drill. Blowing something up is like, you would create a crater for sure. In this case, we don't want a crater, we want a nice bored hole, so that we can get certain thermal benefits out of it and other, protection from UV. There's a few things, but yeah, kind of a roundabout way of answering that one. So.
I mean, one of the problems with doing something exclusively is you get rid of the evidence. You get rid of some of the science that you're trying to do while you're there.
Yeah.
Usually why you blow things up.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, maybe we're tunneling on the moon.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, is there any sort of like space, I know space law is like a new upcoming thing, but is there any laws against blowing up parts of the planet just for funsies?
For funsies, I feel like it's probably like
Space law, that's a whole
space
lot.
law, probably like maritime law, where there's this uncontrolled waters. I mean, if you're gonna go to space and do this stuff, I can tell you with almost complete certainty, there's nobody that's gonna stop you. As long as you get out from Earth, like once you're on your way, like you're headed there, you're gonna do what you're gonna do, and there's not much we can do about it. But so enforceability of such laws would be difficult unless there's somebody on the ground with the the controller, right?
Yeah.
That's up there.
Yeah, that is true.
Like weapons testing on the moon, you know what I mean, that kind of thing?
Right, yeah, and there's definitely mission architectures that do some like explosive things. They do some things that will change surfaces. Like Skycrane, for instance, it lands, drops off the rover, and then it flies off and crashes like in the distance, right? Like that's something that's going to leave a little bit of crater. But they do think about the impact on Mars and the planetary protection stuff. Like there's a whole department of NASA dedicated to planetary protection. And it's a pretty serious thing. Like they want to make sure that they're preserving Mars so that when we go and do more science, we don't just find Earth life there and be like, oh, how the hell did that get there? Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's because we crash landed a thing into the surface and like, now there's human, Earth gunk there. So yeah, we have another.
So we heard like wind on Mars.
Yeah.
They do assume there's wind on the moon.
Also, the big difference between the moon and Mars is Mars it's a very thin atmosphere, but it has an atmosphere. And now there are probably a couple of gas particles floating around the moon, but it's really, really, it's like a rarefied gas. It's not really like, there's not really an atmosphere enough to like get winds. There's dust on the moon, and if you're gonna come and land, you're gonna blow dust around and that stuff. It's not gonna like have a dust cloud like it does in atmosphere, because that's mostly suspended by the atmosphere. On the moon, it's gonna follow a parabolic trajectory, just go right back down. So there's not really much wind to hear on the moon, unfortunately. It would be pretty cool.
So you don't have to worry about like the dust getting on the solar panels that you just expanded.
Well, not spontaneously. It's definitely like charged particles do actually knock bits of regolith around, right? And so it is a thing that we've thought about, how to make sure that these don't clutter up the solar panel and reduce the effectiveness. It's still a thing. It's less of a concern than it is on Mars because you have those winds that are blowing around just sand all the time. So, yeah. Got a couple more questions. Oh, I got one in the back.
Will you use your telescopic pole to set up communications around the moon?
That is another one that we've actually we are exploring right now. It's certainly got the capability to do line of sight communications. And like when you can put up a tall tower like that, it makes a lot of things that weren't possible before suddenly possible. So yeah, short answer is yes, that's something we're looking at. Oh, sorry. This one for you got you first, and then we'll go. Yeah. That's great.
Do you have any like earthbound applications?
So first one is wrapping paper. The very first versions of it, when we're trying to wrap our heads around it, pun shamelessly intended, was I was cutting it out of cardboard just to like, how do we do this? Like I needed to make a little section of it to get my head to just comprehend what it was that we're trying to do. So in a way, yes, I didn't actually use a cardboard or wrapping tube. I know what you're talking about. Similar though. And sorry, what was the second one? It was earthbound applications. Yeah, so there are some Earth applications. There's actually there's a concert stage in, I think it's like Norway or Sweden or something, that uses a similar thing called spiral lift. And the spiral lift is a similar, it's much heavier. It's built to basically replace hydraulic cylinders. So very different take on a similar idea. So there's already sort of things. It's not necessarily being developed in that direction yet, but I mean, who knows? And it could be the next thing that pops up. So yeah, exactly. This is a lower gravity environment on the moon, right? So it makes it a little bit easier to pick up heavier things. And in fact, when we test with these things, we offload gravity, and it sounds really cool at first, like, oh, we've got like a gravity ray. No, it's just it's a winch. We pull it with some tension, and that tension matches 5/6 of the actual weight of the object to simulate 1/6 gravity of the moon. It's really kind of dumb and simple. So, we had a question over.
Since there's no magnetic field on the moon and no GPS, is it mostly just dead reckoning, or are there any other ways to judge how to navigate on the moon?
Yeah, so when you're on the moon, you have line of sight to Earth, and you can communicate in some cases with Earth assets. And this is not my field of expertise, so I'm speaking a little bit out of there. It would be, to get like location of the moon, let's say with the thing that's driving around it, right? It'd be a mixture of different measurements. You might have a sun tracker, you might have a star tracker, and those are devices that look up at the things in the moon sky, right? It's not really sky, it's an atmosphere, but it looks up, it sees these certain points of reference, and it's able to orient itself from them. But then for local motion, you're not going to get sub-centimeter, from that, right? You might use local terrain and map it to satellite images. You might have a relay to a lunar orbital asset. And these sort of things, like this whole architecture would be designed by a GNC team, guidance, navigation, and control. So those types of engineers would be the ones to actually figure out the architecture for getting good localization, or at least getting as good as you need. And then beyond that, dead reckoning is like looking at the actual wheel turns, or encoder ticks, like just counting actual motion, which has some flaws because it will get sort of tripped up by wheel slip or different things that you don't directly sense. So it would be like a fusion of all these different types of measurements. So if you want to know, how do I go from right here to 1 meter right here, you might use inertial measurements, which is just like, your iPhone has like tilt sensors and stuff, right? So you can use those types of things to detect motion and actually get a pretty good estimate of where you're at. You would fuse that with your wheel counts and with your star tracker stuff, and all these things go together to actually get sort of an estimated guess from all these different sources.
Answer some you don't know.
Yeah, you got 2 here, so. Yeah, no, I know nothing about that.
I was gonna ask, would you put a camera on it?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. Why don't you answer that one?
There you go.
Nice. That's actually something I've been, every time I walk through the doors of where he works, I'm yelling at people like, has anybody put a camera on that thing yet? And actually, Bobby did put me in touch with their, I guess the PI, the principal investigator for this whole project. And I made the case, and basically his answer was like, if you can find a way to pay for it, I'll consider putting it on there.
That's how space goes a lot of the time.
Which would be the same for GPS locators or anything like that. There's a lot of this technology that he's come up with, this really cool way to deploy has, I think, countless, there's a lot of really helpful reasons to have things that you can raise up, some height above the lunar surface, and getting, if you can bring something there that fits in the size of a large suitcase instead of a 30, 50 foot long tube, it really makes everyone's life easier. It's still, the moon wants to kill you, like Mars wants to kill you, space wants to kill you, but within that context, we don't want to kill you.
Thanks.
So I think Jeff and Bobby and I, we're just gonna be hanging out here. If anybody else has any questions, come up, I think, and we can just cue the music. Let's hear it one more time, please, for Bobby Van Ness. There you go. Maybe turn the lights up a little, have some beers. Thank you guys for joining the first Space Talks, which we hope will continue into the New Year's. And Happy Sundays is tomorrow. My band is at the compound 6 p.m. if anybody wants to come. And cue the music. Thank you so much, you guys. Thanks for being here.